Hello, and welcome to 2024 Cybersecurity Scoop, Balancing Progress and Protection with CompTIA. Today's webinar is sponsored by CompTIA and produced by Actual Tech Media. My name is Scott Becker. I'm from Actual Tech Media, and I'm excited to be your moderator for this especially timely and interactive presentation. Now, before we get to today's great content, we do have a few housekeeping items that will help you get the most out of the session. First off, we want this to be an informative event for you, so we encourage any questions in the questions box in your webinar control panel. So not only will we have team members responding to questions during the live event, but we'll also have a dedicated Q&A session at the end of the presentation where we'll discuss in greater detail some of the top questions that you ask. That Q&A panel is also the place to let us know about any technical issues that you might be experiencing. A browser refresh will fix most audio, video, or slide advancement issues, but if that doesn't work, just let us know in the Q&A and we'll provide further technical assistance. Second, in the handout section of your webinar control panel, you'll find that we're offering several resources, and I'd especially like to call your attention to several links there from CompTIA. There's CompTIA's 2024 State of Cybersecurity Report, which is going to be the focus of this event. So you can grab the report itself from that link. There's CompTIA's Complete Guide to Risk Management. And there's also CompTIA's Cybersecurity Resources, which is a nice collection of handy resources. So I'd highly recommend accessing those resources now and sharing them with your friends and colleagues. Now, third, at the end of this webinar event, we will be awarding a $250 Amazon gift card to one lucky registrant. Of course, you must be in attendance during the live event to qualify for the prize. Official terms and conditions of today's prize drawing can be found in the handout section. Just scroll to the bottom and you'll find the prize terms and conditions link there. Now, finally, one of the best benefits of this event is the opportunity to ask a question of our expert panel. So to help encourage your questions, we have a special additional prize for you. That's another Amazon gift card, this one for $50 for the best question. So after the event is over, the Actual Tech Media team will look at all the questions that came in, pick out the very best one, and contact that prize winner. So with all that out of the way, let's get to today's important conversation. So it's my pleasure to introduce you to our presenters from CompTIA. We have Seth Robinson, who's Vice President for Industry Research at CompTIA. We have Hannah Johnson, who's Head of Tech Talent Programs at CompTIA. And we have Ron Culler, who's Vice President of Cyber Development Programs at CompTIA. So Seth, Hannah, and Ron, delighted to have all three of you here. And I'd love if you could each say a little bit about yourself. Seth, maybe we could start with you.
Thanks, Scott. It's our pleasure to be here today. Really looking forward to the discussion, diving into our latest research on cybersecurity. I'm part of the research team here at CompTIA. My primary focus is on technology trends like cybersecurity, and I was the author of this report. During the 13 or so years that I've been at CompTIA, I've focused on cloud computing and mobile devices and artificial intelligence and lots of other topics that are of interest to people seeking jobs or companies that are trying to implement technology for their business purposes. So that's just a little bit of background on who I am.
So research right at the heart of what, everything that's been hot over that 13-year span that you've been at CompTIA. That's awesome. Hannah, great to have you here. Maybe you could say a little bit about yourself too.
Great to be here. Thanks, Scott. Hi, everyone. My name is Hannah Johnson. I am the Senior Vice President of Tech Talent Programs here at CompTIA. I am part of our product team. Historically, I've been in HR and an HR executive, primarily in financial services, but also had a lot of experience with tech companies. And so just really excited to have this conversation about what I'm seeing in terms of trends around talent strategy and how we can hopefully continue to build up the skills of cybersecurity professionals everywhere.
Excellent. Well, and that's great experience for one of the biggest problems in cybersecurity is staffing. So delighted to have you here on the panel as well. And Ron, welcome. Maybe a few words for you about your background.
Sure. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited about this opportunity. Like you mentioned, I'm the Vice President of Cyber Development Programs here for CompTIA, and think of me as a key strategist in the cybersecurity and learning and certification development programs for CompTIA. Also provide some insights into cybersecurity workforce and trends for the industry. I'm a 10-year Navy veteran and a 30-year cybersecurity practitioner. So I've been around the business for a little while.
Excellent. Looking forward to your insights.
Thanks.
Okay, well, so CompTIA, well-known organization, but Seth, maybe to start us off, you could give us just a little bit of background about CompTIA.
Sure. For anyone who might not be familiar with the name CompTIA, maybe you're more familiar with some of the certifications we provide, like A+ or Security Plus or Network Plus. We are a trade association within the IT industry, one of the leading trade associations. And our goal is to unlock the potential of technology, both for individuals working with technology and for companies that are in the technology industry and also trying to use technology for digital transformation. So one of the main ways that we try to unlock that potential is through our training and certification programs for job seekers and then for people that are trying to advance their career. And we also have a pretty strong membership program serving managed service providers and distributors and vendors, lots of different companies within the technology industry that are all trying to provide technology products and services to end users. And they have a lot of different issues and needs as the landscape is changing. And so we try to represent those interests.
Excellent. All right. Well, thanks for that. So it's Cyber Awareness Month, and we're here to talk about CompTIA's 2024 State of Cybersecurity Report. So, Seth, before we dive into this discussion, can you tell us a little bit about why this report is so important and about some of the 4 areas that we'll be discussing today: policy, process, people, and product?
Sure. I think the importance of the report is probably not a surprise to anyone that's on the webinar. Cybersecurity is one of the most talked about topics in technology because it tends to be so dynamic. Obviously, any area of technology has been dynamic over the past decade or so, but cybersecurity is one that changes pretty rapidly all the time because you've got not only a changing technology footprint within enterprise and small businesses, but also changing threat landscape and different ways that attackers are trying to get in and make profit from digital information or from some kind of disruption to operations. So companies have really had to shift their mindset around cybersecurity. It's no longer just a defensive mindset. It's no longer just one small part of IT operations. For most organizations, cybersecurity stands on its own and is a discipline that has a dedicated team of professionals working on cybersecurity initiatives. So we have also dedicated a significant report to this topic, and it's something that we've done year over year for several years now. This 4-pronged approach of process, policy, process, people, and product is one that we have kind of built with other experts in the industry. This is a standard way of kind of looking at the cybersecurity picture. It's somewhat of a top-down approach, and that's what we want to go through today in the discussion.
Okay, excellent. Well, I promised that this would be an interactive event, and so here's the proof of it. We're going to have a number of poll questions throughout the presentation, and they're going to help drive some of the conversation. So this is the first one. Which of these topics is most important to you in regards to risk analysis? And so the options are technology procurement, cloud computing, classification or ownership of data, use of mobile devices, and use of social media. So let's just leave that up there for just a minute and give everybody an opportunity to respond to that one. Again, it's technology procurement, cloud computing, classification, ownership of data, use of mobile devices, and use of social media. So right now it looks like, we're getting a slight lead in technology procurement and cloud computing. I don't want to give up too much because we'll talk about this later, but that's the head-to-head at the moment. Although we've got classification and ownership of data coming in kind of strong. Sort of a dark horse there. All right. Well, let's just give that another 5 seconds. So if you want to respond, here's your countdown: 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right. So let's move on to our first section of the report that we're going to talk about. So, the report speaks to how risk management is becoming the primary method for solving one of modern cybersecurity's greatest challenges, the connection between cyber efforts and business operations. So, Seth, can you tell us a little more about that?
Sure. Like I mentioned before, this is kind of a top-down approach, which is something different from the way that a lot of companies have approached cybersecurity in the past, where they're just kind of focused on the tactics that need to happen. When we start with policy, we're not necessarily talking about a written policy or the thing that employees would sign off on in an annual cybersecurity review. We're kind of talking about the mindset and the culture that an organization is trying to set around cybersecurity and what really drives cybersecurity strategy for a company. And risk management is the area that we've really identified this year as being something that is going to be that primary driver. We've seen risk management be part of cybersecurity practice for a few years now, but we've also seen that a lot of companies struggle to understand what are the metrics for success when it comes to cybersecurity, or how do they know if they're making some of the right investments. And so as we move forward with the modern cybersecurity strategy, these two things are coming together, and risk management and risk analysis is becoming the way that companies are going to set their investments, they're going to set their overall strategy, and they're going to understand which pieces of the organization and which digital assets are the most important. And so those assets will be the ones getting a lot of the cybersecurity attention. There are a lot of formal frameworks out there, like things from NIST or other organizations. And you can see in our survey right now, over half of the companies are using some kind of formal framework. And that number is probably skewed a little bit by companies that might be in highly regulated industries, and they've had to use more formal frameworks for some time now. I think as we're moving forward, we're going to see companies of any industry start to adopt a little bit more formal approach to risk management so that they can properly set their cybersecurity strategy and investment outlook. Ron, I don't know if that's anything that you're kind of seeing in the field as well.
Yeah, sorry about that. I was on mute. It is something that we're seeing a lot more, and for a couple of reasons. One, it's a top-down approach, so business leaders and heads understand risk. They've understood this from a financial standpoint for a number of years now. So this is a natural extension, but it's also something that is being driven by cyber insurance. Some of the liability insurance policies and things organizations are starting to now look at or having to take on board. And that industry has evolved over the last few years to actually starting to use these risk frameworks and looking for specific things. 10 years ago, it was just a checkbox. Now there are a lot more pieces to it, and they're really delving deep into an organization to understand what are the actual risks inside of that organization.
Yeah, and one thing I'm not sure how much cross-tabbing you did maybe with this survey, Seth, but I wonder if there's a difference in that as far as organizations that assess risk with a formal framework. Do they tend to be the larger organizations that are responding to the survey, or is it mixed across the board?
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring that up. We definitely do try to segment, our responses and try to look at that by industry and by company size. And for this particular question, it's interesting to see that the data shows that medium-sized companies, so those are the companies that we define as being between like 100 and 500 employees, those are the ones that show that they're the most likely to use a formal framework. However, I think you're right that the larger organizations probably are using it. I think the reason that we don't necessarily see that in our data is because we're also asking a cross-section of employees. So at a large organization, we're asking some business employees some of these cybersecurity questions, and they may be far enough removed from cybersecurity activity that they aren't really up to speed on what kind of formal frameworks might be getting used by the CISO and their team. Yeah. So I do think that this skews towards the large end of the scale. We definitely see that drop in the smallest companies, those companies that are below 100 employees. And, with so many cybersecurity trends, the smallest companies tend to be the ones that we are kind of the most concerned about, because traditionally they haven't thought that they are a target for cyber attacks. And with the organization of cyber criminals these days, they're able to spread those attacks a lot wider. And so smaller companies are becoming more and more at risk, and they really have to pay attention to these best practices like following a formal risk management framework.
Gotcha. Really good points. Okay, well, let's move on to take a look at the results of our first survey. And, the question again was, which of these topics is most important to you in regard to risk analysis? And the winner at 39% is cloud computing, followed by classification, or ownership of data. So, Ron or Seth, any thoughts about those results there? Anything surprising in
the
there?
Cloud computing is an easy one. It's somebody else's computer. So that's something that organizations typically lose or have little control over in those environments. So there's another vendor, another company, other layers involved in this. So definitely see that as an option or as a key indicator. But then when you start looking at the classification and ownership piece of it, what do we do with cloud computing? We push large amounts of data in there. So now you've got data spread across multiple cloud platforms. So organizations are obviously going to try to figure out, where is my data? Where does this stuff live today? And is it at risk? Is there something that was moved or cloned or put out there that we just don't know about from an IT or a CISO perspective?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll add in, all of these questions that we're going to be asking the group today actually are questions that we asked in our survey. So we'll be able to kind of compare. We're not going to display the results of our survey. That's in our report, but I can talk to it. And I'll say that the responses that we got here track the responses that we got in our survey, with the exception of technology procurement, which in our survey was the leading answer. And I think a lot of that is down to the types of groups that we're talking to, and whether or not those groups are involved in trying to define technology procurement for their organization, or if they are, tightly tied to the IT team, where technology procurement has been a challenge for a long time as different business units are procuring their own technology. But I would agree with everything that Ron said. There's a lot of good reasons that cloud computing is on the top. And I would also point out the one that's on the bottom here, social media. This is kind of a segue into our next section, but social media is another one of those things that isn't really under the control of the company, but the behavior on social media can really open up a company to vulnerabilities if an attacker starts to get information and use that for social engineering or phishing. So a lot of companies are starting to realize that many activities that aren't completely in the domain of the company operations still have to be part of a risk management analysis.
Interesting. Yeah. Okay. Well, speaking of that next poll, or the next section, let's move on to our next poll. And we did promise you that you'd have plenty of opportunities to interact today. So here's another one. Is cybersecurity a main consideration when assessing new tech initiatives? So, we're looking for a yes, or it's a secondary factor, or we're not considering it all. So we'll leave this question up there for a little bit. And I think that when we discuss this, the answers that we're seeing are not going to be surprising on this one. But let's let that go for just another moment. And I'll leave that up here for a second while I kind of queue up the next question, but so we're going to talk next about process and how both building cybersecurity processes and integrating cybersecurity into business workflows drives many functional decisions. So, Seth, can you tell us a little bit more on these elements of organizational cyber strategy?
Yeah, when we get into process, now I think we are starting to talk about those processes and policies and procedures that a company would write down and they would build in terms of their operations and in terms of how they want workflow to go and to happen securely. So this is starting to get a little bit more tactical, but still really setting a lot of strategy here. And like I mentioned previously, what we're starting to see when it comes to businesses setting up these process steps is that cybersecurity processes are one thing, and there are a lot of elements that are very tightly tied to what a cybersecurity team might be doing, like the monitoring and analytics, threat intelligence, just direct cybersecurity activities there. But we're starting to see more and more where the process or the activity taking place isn't really owned by the cybersecurity team. It might not be owned by the IT team or anyone in technology, but it could be something like employee exit procedures, which is kind of in Hannah's wheelhouse of something that would be owned by the HR function. And in our age of remote working, there's a lot less oversight to when an employee leaves the company. Are you getting those assets returned properly? Are you shutting off access in the way that you should? So all of these different elements of cybersecurity strategy are things that the cybersecurity team might be doing. They also have to make sure that they're communicating and collaborating with their peers and their colleagues in other business units so that cybersecurity is being considered for the processes that are in that domain as well. Ron or Hannah, I'm not sure if you kind of see any of this in the people that you talk to, or anything like that, where some of the functions that might not be very directly impacted by technology are still having to kind of go through cybersecurity and understand how this can impact the secure posture of a company.
Well, that's definitely the goal of everybody in cybersecurity, is that whenever technology or any kind of process that affects the risk stature of an organization, when that happens, the cybersecurity groups, they want to know about it. They want to understand these things. Unfortunately, because different business units, like you mentioned, tend to go out and acquire their technology, sometimes without talking to IT or cybersecurity. When they start doing that, you end up with the guys on the risk side, playing catch up. They're trying to figure out what was just put in place. They have to protect this. They have to manage this, but they had no input whatsoever into it actually coming in. So, a lot of these things, the elements are common inside of an organization, inside of their cyber units or IT units. Sometimes they could be actually provided by third parties, or the actual organization themselves. Some of the larger organizations will do majority of these elements themselves. Others will farm out key indicators or key pieces, maybe threat intelligence or threat hunting or something like that. They'll pull those pieces out. And the further down you go in size, so the mid-size, you'll get a little bit more shift. And in a lot of smaller organizations, majority of this actually may be outsourced.
Interesting. Yeah, and as you look at this sort of stack ranking, are there things that surprise you in terms of their placement? Like personally, I look at tabletop exercises, which seem fairly vital, and that's like sort of distressingly low on the list. Zero trust framework is something we hear a lot about, but maybe over time, it's come up substantially, but it still has a fair way to go on the list. And anything that Seth, that jumped out at you as you were, as you saw these results?
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. We look at this, and I think there are different reasons that you see some things maybe being a little bit out of balance with what we would expect. And so something like tabletop exercises, I think that gets talked about a lot in cybersecurity circles as being a critical component, as being something that can really highlight where there might be vulnerabilities or areas for improvement. But then when it comes to how things are going in practice, then it sort of falls off a cliff. I think with Zero Trust Framework, that's a really interesting one where that terminology and the thought of adopting a Zero Trust Framework is something that obviously not a lot of companies recognize that is happening at their organization. But if we dive into the details of what goes into a Zero Trust Framework, so things like multi-factor authentication or network segmentation or least privilege access, you start to see more companies saying, yeah, I'm doing these things. So I think that's one where the piecemeal picture is a little bit better than the overall picture and the recognition of that name. The one that always jumps out to me looking at this is governance, risk, and compliance. That highly regulated industries, again, have had to follow certain regulations and certain compliance laws for a long time. But there are more and more of those regulations and those outside externalities that are driving the ways that companies should think about their cybersecurity. And we don't see as rapid adoption of GRC type processes as we would like to see. I think there are a lot more companies that need to be thinking more seriously about these types of activities. And I think to Ron's point, this is another example of one of those facets of cybersecurity that is not just using the technology, setting up the firewall, configuring the monitoring system, setting up your SIM dashboard. This is a lot around best practices and logging and understanding the legal landscape and the requirements, especially when you start to cross borders. And we can see that it's becoming more and more critical to digital operations, but we can also see that not as many companies recognize how important it really is.
Interesting.
I think it has a lot to do also with the maturity level of the organization and their cyber teams. Realistically, unless they're taking a strong approach to risk management, they're not going to be looking at tabletop exercises, for instance. It's not something you don't do a tabletop exercise if you don't have something to measure it against, something to know what are our key critical risk areas and how do we recover if something happens.
Interesting. All right. Excellent. Okay. Well, let's move forward into the results of that last poll. And as I promised, I don't think there's going to be a big surprise to our panelists or to the audience. Is cybersecurity a main consideration when assessing new tech initiatives? And it's the main consideration for 81%.
Yeah, I'll say that's actually a little bit of a surprise to me, or I should say it's different from what we saw in our results, where there was more of an even split between those first two, where it's either the main consideration or maybe a secondary factor. We didn't see too many, that said not considered at all. But I think I wonder if maybe there's, in this live format, there's, some fear that we're going to be doing shaming of anyone that says, oh yeah, cybersecurity is the main consideration for us. I think, Scott, you were kind of describing it. The reality is that a lot of companies, are really aggressive about pursuing new technology, and they might kind of assume that whatever they have in place for cybersecurity covers those new pursuits. And that is not the case. I think we're definitely seeing awareness grow that cybersecurity has to be a primary consideration. But a lot of those workflows and practices and mentalities haven't changed at organizations. So there's still a lot of behavior that sort of needs to shift over into making cybersecurity a primary consideration rather than something that you come back to after you've already made a few different decisions about the technology that you want to use.
All right, great points. So let's move into our next poll. And this one is, what do you feel is the biggest cybersecurity challenge? The first response here is the cybersecurity skills gap among internal employees. Then belief the current strategy is good enough. Prioritization of other technology, so non-security technologies. Lack of budget dedicated to security. and then low understanding of new cybersecurity threats. So we'll just let that one run there. We've got responses rolling in, and as Seth mentioned, there's possibly fear of shaming. There's no shaming that's going to happen. We're not identifying individual poll respondents. You're all sort of in the aggregate here, so you can answer honestly. Let's just give that one a second. We've got a lot of responses coming in on this one. All right. So now let's talk people. So according to the report, companies are turning toward methods that will bring in less experienced cybersecurity professionals who can then continue building their skills while also becoming familiar with corporate culture and objectives. And I'd love to bring Hannah into the conversation at this point. Hannah, it sounds like that, like the new trend around quiet hiring. So why is this building steam?
Well, it's building steam because, as I'm sure many of the people on this webinar are feeling, is that there is a continued increased demand for cybersecurity talent within organizations of all sizes. And I think that the demand has outpaced the supply. And so quiet hiring is essentially the practice for an organization to look within internally and to determine what skills gaps do we have, and where amongst our current employee population could we potentially upskill or train employees to fill those gaps. And we're just seeing this pick up steam a lot more because, for example, in a scenario that we see quite often at CompTIA and that we often assist organizations with is the need for additional cybersecurity talent within their organization. There is a lot of transferable skills from individuals, say, in IT help desk or IT support specialist positions, where it would be a lot faster and a lot more advantageous for a variety of reasons, which we can touch on, for them to upskill and train those individuals to then fill that gap and potentially become cybersecurity analysts, whatever it may be, and then backfill the IT help desk or IT support position. Employers obviously really gravitate towards this model because those employees are already within the organization. They already understand and have institutional knowledge of the policies and practices. They're at this point, hopefully, already engaged and productive. And this can be another tool for employers to show that they're really interested in the development of their employees. And then for employees, it's also great for them to be able to add on different skill sets to what they already have to make themselves more employable, to create more career opportunities for themselves, ideally, obviously, within the organization that has invested in them. And then when you're filling in potentially the pipeline at a more junior level, it's typically a bit easier to fill. And then you can, at that point, also probably think about how you can start to train those newer employees or entry-level employees with some of those skills that you identified were gaps in a reactive state. And this way, obviously, you're doing it a bit more proactively. So to me, it makes a ton of sense. And again, it's certainly something that we're helping quite a few organizations with at this time.
Huh.
Yeah, that's a great description of what we're seeing in the data too, where that training that you're describing, Hannah, that upskilling is the primary option that a lot of companies are choosing to tackle their cybersecurity skill gap problem. When it comes to new hiring, which is obviously something that most companies have to do to serve this huge demand that they have, we're kind of seeing the same thing. You touched on this a little bit, Scott, where the data is showing that, companies used to think, we just want to hire someone that's got like 5 to 10 years of experience in cybersecurity. And that's great for as long as you can do that, but that pipeline starts to run dry pretty quickly. So I think along with, this recognition of doing internal training, companies, I think, are recognizing that they can do that with even entry level or early career employees as well. And they don't have to look for that person with experience. And so they're even looking for people that might not have a degree in technology or any kind of college degree at all, as long as they can prove that they've got the skills through certifications or boot camps or whatever it might be. And then they're willing to do that training that they've already built because they're training their internal people. All of this rests on the skills that need to be trained, right? And so companies have to build this really good understanding of what skills they need. The skills that we're showing on the screen here are obviously kind of hard technical skills, focused probably on cybersecurity professionals. I'd say when it comes to skills gaps, these are the primary ones that companies are trying to fill, are those cybersecurity professional skills, but they're also considering cybersecurity awareness skills that might need to be present for the rest of their workforce. So people in business units. So there's definitely a lot going on in this space. And I think, like you said, Hannah, it all kind of rests on a skills-based approach.
Mm-hmm. I think
I completely agree.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Ron.
I was going to say that when organizations are looking for that, senior candidate out there, every one of those people have jobs. Every one of those people are gainfully employed in organizations. There's no mechanism out there to just pop out people with 5 to 10 years experience. And if you're going to get somebody that has that experience level, that means another organization just lost them. And the chances of you losing that individual that you just hired has gone up exponentially, because somebody's going to come with that exact same need, and they're going to look, and it's probably going to raise the benefits, raise the salary some, and they're going to get poached by bringing people up internally to your organization, or looking at those individuals that are brand new to the industry with certifications, not necessarily a degree, but skills and certifications. Those are individuals that are coming in and are going to appreciate that ability to learn and develop inside of an organization. And it's going to help with your retention processes.
I'm glad you brought that up, Ron, about certifications and degree pathways. I think, something that CompTIA is particularly passionate about is that you don't need a degree in order to be successful in a career in IT or in cybersecurity, and through certifications and through training, that it's certainly something that is possible for anyone. So I just want to reiterate that you brought it up. I think that's important, because if we're talking about a pipeline issue here, it also requires that we as advocates of the IT industry make sure that we're letting employers know that we're very confident and believe that it's possible, and hope that employer hiring practices can begin to shift that way.
I wanted to ask, Hannah, based on what you and Ron were both talking about, as far as, if you go and get that employee with 5 or 10 or more years of experience, somebody else loses them. As far as employers go, in addition to, keeping salaries and benefits competitive, are there other things that an organization can do to ensure that somebody who's there wants to stay?
I mean, it's a great question. And I think sorry, Ron, I think I'd love to hear your thoughts on this as somebody who's in that role. My take from an HR perspective is that you really need to be in tune with obviously what's important to that individual and sort of what their desires are. I would say that what we're seeing thematically is that individuals more and more want to be somewhere that, again, recognizes who they are as a human being, and not just, and this isn't new, but that they see them as a human being and not just sort of an individual that's at an organization to fulfill a job role. So the more that organizations can understand all of the parts that make somebody a productive human being, the more successful they're going to be with retaining their employees.
I agree that institutional knowledge piece that you mentioned earlier, Hannah, is something that's unbelievably valuable for organizations. I mean, if they go get that new hire, they've got 6 months to a year before that individual comes up to speed, when they have people that understand the systems and technologies and the intricacies, the different departments and the nuances in politics. They understand that. So by empowering those individuals within that organization, giving them the ability to learn and grow, an organization's actually showing them that they're important, that we care about you and you're not just a number.
Okay. Well, thanks. Really interesting discussion there. And let's go to the poll results from that last one. What do you feel is the biggest cybersecurity challenge? And, Hannah, the top response there is the cybersecurity skills gap among internal employees.
Not surprising.
Yeah.
I think that, it's certainly a problem that we're trying to help people solve and continue to also develop products to help that get done as quickly as possible. But certainly can relate. And I don't think that differs dramatically from the original output, Seth.
Yeah, that's the top answer that we saw as well. In the past years, we've seen a lot of people saying that the biggest problem is this belief that the current cybersecurity is good enough, right? And just sort of this inertia problem. But this year we saw cybersecurity skills gap jump up, which, like you said, Hannah, isn't really surprising. I mean, I think that as we're beginning to shift that mindset, companies are finding that they need skills to drive the new strategy.
Yep.
Okay. All right. Well, we're up to our last poll of the day. So this one is, do you already work with AI and machine learning? So yes, no, but I'm exploring, and not at all.
Yeah, and I'd add, if you haven't already responded here, respond in terms of your company. So in the work that you're doing, is your company already doing this work, as opposed to you as an individual after hours on ChatGPT?
I can say personally, I was messing around with ChatGPT earlier today.
Yeah, that's why I had to put in the qualifiers.
All right, we've got these responses rolling in. Fairly even. We'll just let that go for another moment. And while we're letting the last few responses there roll in, finally, let's focus on product. So the report highlights that by a large margin, the technology trend capturing the attention of both IT teams and business leaders has been generative AI. So Ron, can you kick us off on this section with discussing some of the impactful ways that organizations are using AI within cyber?
Sure. It's going to be interesting to see the final numbers on that, because we've been using machine learning, or a form of AI, for decades. So if you've got an email product with any kind of scanner for malware or viruses or any of those things, you're using something that incorporates machine learning. Most cybersecurity products today actually have some form of machine learning inside of them. What's different, though, in the last year, really, is the buzz and the not really a buzz. It's megaphones that are going off about generative AI and the large language models, and that's a different kind of beast. That's a different form of learning. It's a different form of cybersecurity, and it's something that will have some effect in the cyberspace. But what's driving cybersecurity AI use today are things like deep learning, natural language processing. They're looking at things that are out there, really looking for patterns, looking at the analytics and the usage patterns of users, of applications, of all of these different types of things going on a network. All those are indicators, and your systems generate so much data that there's no way that individual people can do this. So the platforms out there that are commonly used in SIMs and some of the XDR platforms, the log analysis platforms, things of that nature, all of these things have these machine learning or AI technologies in them. Now, this is going to change. The fact that you can do multimodal or have the ability of a piece of software that can interact with machine learning, that can interact with generative AI, things like ChatGPT, Google Bard, things of that nature through an API, are going to cause things to change. From the bad perspective, it's going to make the traditional things that we thought of, that we've told users for years, when it comes to being able to identify phishing, look for spelling and grammatical errors. Well, if you have Grammarly, you fixed it. If you've got ChatGPT, you can fix it. You can automate these things today. It's not as widespread today, but it's coming. So that's something that the people that are in the message scanning world, they're trying to figure out, how do I analyze a message and determine, was it generated by an AI? Was it something that is actually a phishing attempt or malicious software? Can I do something with that? So there's a lot of pieces out there. One place I do see the generative AI really enhancing is going to be when we start looking at the support side. So that level 1 SOC analyst, he can use generative AI to actually help increase or build the reports. So there's a lot of opportunity out there for that.
Yeah, I definitely want to double down on a couple points you made there, Ron. One is, as people are answering that question, as people answer questions in our survey and they just see AI or machine learning, they tend to think about the most cutting edge form of that, right? And that cutting edge has changed over time to where something that we have now that we just think of as a standard feature, 10 years ago, it was cutting edge AI or machine learning. And I think that's the other really big point here, which is eventually these things get folded in. So when we talk about the cybersecurity toolbox, we've got a chart in our report that's probably 20, 25 items long of all of the different things that people could be using in cybersecurity. AI and machine learning are probably not going to become an individual line item on that list. They are going to get folded into every other tool. So as you can see people saying that they can imagine AI being really beneficial in a wide variety of use cases, that's going to come about from AI getting folded into the tools that are already being used and from people growing their skills to understand AI output a little bit better and to know how to manage it and validate it. It's not necessarily going to be this thing where companies are going out and buying AI in a box and then going and hiring AI specialists to come in and do these things. It's just going to be an evolution of the toolbox and the skill sets that we already have.
I completely agree. When you look at the large language models like the ChatGPT, they take enormous amounts of data to actually generate, to actually learn, and it's extremely expensive. I think the numbers were around $200 million is what it cost OpenAI to do one set of learning. I recently priced out just the cost to do just for the GPUs or the number crunching chips for them to do GPT-5, and just the hardware alone for that piece of it was over $1 billion. So that's not something that your average company is just going to be able to go out and pick up and utilize. Besides, there's a lot of inherent issues inside of a platform that was trained on general internet data versus actually specific data to your organization. So there are some organizations out there now starting to look at generative AI, but they're large. it's Google, it's Microsoft, it's CrowdStrike, it's Palo Alto, it's organizations like that have the funds, but also the large volumes of data.
Yeah, great point about it being for the bigs that way. I just saw a report yesterday that an analyst firm had estimated that U.S. tech giants added $2.4 trillion to their market caps this year, largely on the hype around generative AI. So, that just reinforces exactly what you're saying.
It was on everybody's tongue, the tip of everybody's tongue at the two major cyber events this year.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's move to the results of this last survey. And what we got was 34% said yes, they or their company are already working with AI and ML. 36% no, but exploring, and then 28% not at all. So, any reactions to those results?
Of all the polls that we've done, I think this one comes closest to matching exactly what we saw in our survey. And I think that this really highlights that gap between the hype and the initial interest in a technology and what it takes to pull it into a business environment. Ron pointed out the need for data. I kind of talked a little bit about the need to productize the technology. And I mean, as soon as ChatGPT launched, about a year ago next month, the media kind of grabs that and they're like, okay, how is this going to change the world? That's kind of the direction that they want to take it. The reality is, only a third of people, are even working at organizations where they're kind of actively trying to pull it in. A lot of other people are kind of waiting on the sidelines to make sure a lot of the issues are getting resolved or that it turns into a product. And there are certainly an awful lot of issues, not just technical, but even, ethical, that as it relates to modern AI and ML. So I think this is really no surprise and matches what we saw in the survey.
Agreed.
Excellent. Okay, well, we've got a few more minutes, and we have a lot of questions that have come in from the audience. So you guys ready to get to some of those?
Let's do it.
Okay. The first question, this one comes from Michael, and this is a question for Seth. Michael's wondering, what are the most likely and impactful cyber threats that could compromise our assets and processes, and how do we monitor and detect them early?
Ron, you can chime in on this one too. I would say, for as much as we talk about this landscape changing and threats definitely change, there are a lot of threats that are still useful because companies aren't putting up the defenses, or the awareness in order to combat them, right? So, something like malware that's been around forever, it hasn't stopped being useful. Companies are still, using that. We definitely have some new ones, like ransomware or social engineering. Those take a little bit of a different approach, but I think that this kind of strategy that we've laid out in the report of thinking about something really holistically from the top down and getting down to the part where it is something like a process going to help mitigate the risk of this cyber threat? Or is it a specific technology that we could buy that could help monitor the network better? I think going through that from the top down is what can help identify all of these threats through a risk analysis approach, and then identify what steps you're going to take as an organization to try to combat them.
I completely agree. Whether it's OT, IoT, computing, anything and everything that's electronic that runs software is a risk. Having that risk framework in place where you've gone through and identified where the most valuable pieces of your organization's data and infrastructure live, and what the vulnerabilities or what the risk to that particular piece of technology no longer being a valid or available to you as an organization is going to be where you're going to want to put the most time and energy. But the thing is, you have to look at every single piece of every kind of technology that's plugged into your network, and then that your users are plugged into. What are they using? It's that shadow IT piece that, if you don't understand what somebody in sales or another unit inside your organization are actually using on the side. You can't stop, you can't monitor, you can't protect. So it's everything, and you've got to look at it based on the risk to your organization.
Okay. Another question here, getting back to the AI topic, from Paul, who's asking, is AI and Gen AI likely to be a much bigger threat or concern next year, especially with the U.S. election coming up?
I do think on the generative AI piece has the capability, because it makes it easier to generate disinformation. And when I look back to my years in the Navy, disinformation is something that is used by an adversary. They want to change the thought process. They'll look at disinformation campaigns going to every sector or every group inside of, say, the elections. So they're going to target with key data points and key messages for those. Generative AI makes it harder. You can generate images, you can generate video, you can generate scripts. So it's going to be harder and harder to actually determine, was that video that you watched on social media actually real? So it's going to take a lot more for organizations to really start filtering these things out. And I don't know that we're actually going to be able to do it completely. And to that point, we're going to have to start educating. Really, everybody out there needs to be educated about as to what this, what technology and what disinformation means to an organization, because it's a cyber threat inside a company just as much as it is to a nation.
This next question comes from Digvijay, who's wondering, how does CompTIA balance training and being vigilant against phishing attempts versus scaring employees from clicking on legitimate emails?
Hannah, do you have any thoughts on that from our product portfolio? Or
I don't know. I mean, I feel like that question is probably more about whether we have products that provide that type of training, which I don't believe we have any. So, I mean, Ron, I hate to punt it to you, but I would want to know, even just high level, what your thoughts are on that. From a perspective, like, how do you?
It's one of these things. I think really it's one of these things that that kind of falls into the cyber awareness programs that the annual videos that you watch or biannual videos that you watch, and you go through these quizzes. They're there for a reason, because people continue to do this.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, email's a 60-year-old experiment. It was never intended to do what it does today. Having all the pretty pictures and all the links and all these things that you can do with an email message really wasn't what it was intended for. It was a couple of mainframe operators wanting to chat with one another between universities. So the things that we use today and take for granted are, causing us problems, and people still continue to do it. Especially when you think about things like spear phishing or the business email compromise. Simple things of a business policy that says, if somebody tells you to transfer money or change financial account data, you don't do it unless you go through these external steps and have other individuals validate. You could stop every single one of the financial compromises that occur out there simply by people doing their job and doing a process. Unfortunately, though, we don't educate people well enough, and they continue to do this. So we're going to continue to have awareness training coming out every 6 to 12 months.
I think the other, from an HR people perspective, how I view this is, once like you mentioned, Ron, I think that historically, this has, over the past few years, changed from being a check the box exercise for organizations to being a much more intentional training for organizations. And more, I think there needs to be a focus on why does it also not just matter to the organization, but to the individual. And I think going back to that, to the topic about social media use, just as much as our personal use of social media could reflect on our organization, something that we do within our organization could reflect on us on a broader scale as well. So like, we're all in this together. So really kind of trying to bring it back to why somebody, an individual who may or may not have anything to do with something cybersecurity related in their day-to-day job, but why they should really care and be paying attention to those trainings. I think is where the focus goes.
Everybody has a point of cybersecurity awareness, a point of cybersecurity protection for themselves as well as their organization. So everybody has that responsibility. It's not, the guy on the loading dock has that responsibility. Individual sitting at home on social media has that responsibility. Mm-hmm. An organization, it's not uncommon for an organization to look at your social media history to determine what kind of an individual are you. Do you overshare? Do you do things that could put our IP at risk or our organization at risk when you're not at work? That's a valid point that individuals want to know. And from years back when I had a clearance, it was one of the things that they monitored everything about you, your financial health, all of these things. Now in cyber with social media, they want to know all of this because it's all important to the credibility of you as an individual, protecting whether it's the IP of a company or your own personal safety and financial health.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, unfortunately, I think we're going to have to leave it there. It's a great place to leave it. This has been a fantastic conversation. I want to thank Seth and Hannah and Ron for all your insights throughout the conversation, and thank you so much for being here and giving us an overview of this State of Cybersecurity Report.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Well, as we wrap up here, we have one more piece of business, and that is the $250 Amazon gift card drawing. Before I do the drawing, I do want to give everybody a quick reminder that this is your last opportunity to grab those handouts. The CompTIA 2024 State of Cybersecurity Report is right there in your handout section. Also, the Complete Guide to Risk Management and those cybersecurity resources. So grab those if you're interested in them. And the winner of the $250 Amazon gift card is Mike Dallio from Illinois. So congratulations to Mike Dallio. We'll be in touch about getting you your card. And with that, on behalf of the Actual Tech Media team, I want to thank CompTIA for making this event possible. Thanks for participating in all the polls today and for all of your great questions in the Q&A portion. That's going to conclude today's event. Have a fantastic rest of your day and stay safe out there.